My father's brass rule fit a lock hidden inside the telescope's counterweight.
She was 23 and homeless. No room, no family, no key, just her father's brass sighting rule and $85 she had earned washing motel sheets after midnight. And with that money, she bought a forgotten observatory tower above Flagstaff in Coconino County, Arizona, erased from county maps in 1967. The iron dome had frozen shut. The telescope pier had split through its base. The county condemned the tower on October 14, 2022, with demolition planned for the following spring. Inside its massive lead counterweight waited a sealed chamber untouched for 58 years, holding money coordinates and the last honest proof of her father's work. Before we continue, if stories like this mean something to you, hit subscribe and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. Iris Vale had been measuring her whole life without knowing it. As a child, she measured winter by frost creeping down her window and summer by how long her father stayed outside after supper. Other children were told to make wishes. Iris was taught to wait until the light stopped trembling, then name what was actually there. Her father, Dr. Nathaniel Vale, carried silence like a clean instrument case. When Iris was small, he lifted her to the eyepiece and steadied her shoulder with 2 fingers, as if even affection should leave the glass undisturbed. Every Saturday from her 9th year until community college, Nathaniel drove her north of town in a faded International Scout. Where the ponderosa forest opened toward the San Francisco peaks, they spread oilcloth over the hood and worked from a leather-bound star atlas. He taught her to level a brass sextant, correct for index error, and take 3 readings before trusting one. At noon, they ate hard-boiled eggs with salt folded into wax paper. After dark, they calibrated lenses by moving a candle across a measured 100 feet, watching for distortion near the rim. Nathaniel made her write every reading twice, once in numbers, once in words. A coordinate is a promise, he said. Someone may cross a desert because you wrote it down. The sentence stayed because it made accuracy moral. A careless number could send another person toward empty ground with the sun going down. Nathaniel died in March after a blood clot reached his lungs before the ambulance cleared the hospital drive. His atlas sextant, field notebooks, lens cloths, and walnut tool case remained in the study for 11 days. On the 12th, Iris came home to bare shelves and the oily sweetness of burned paper drifting from the fireplace. Her stepmother, Lenora, kept the house so orderly it seemed no one had lived there. She removed Nathaniel's photographs, turned his office into a pale guest room, and spoke of moving forward while labeling boxes for donation. Control arrived as changed locks, forwarded mail, canceled insurance, and meals served after Iris's place had been cleared. When asked about the notebooks, Lenora folded a dish towel into exact thirds and said smoke was cleaner than confusion. On April 6, Iris returned from a grocery shift and found her canvas duffel on the walk. Her father's wool coat lay across it, one sleeve touching gravel. Lenora stood behind the screen door with Nathaniel's brass sighting rule between 2 fingers. Iris believed she meant to return it. Lenora set it on the threshold and said, "Your father's gone. This house is mine now." The door closed. Through the glass, Nathaniel's second wife watched without moving, her face reflected over the room she had emptied. Iris picked up the rule before the metal cooled. For 6 weeks, she slept wherever darkness offered cover. The first 9 nights were in her 2004 Corolla behind a laundromat on East Route 66, where dryers thudded until dawn and the temperature fell to 28 degrees. When security began tapping windows, she moved to a hospital garage, then south to Sedona, parking among trail vehicles at Dry Creek and waking before rangers arrived. She bought gasoline in $5 amounts, oatmeal in paper cups, and 1 blanket from a Cottonwood thrift store. $83 became $67, then $41. A failing alternator took 26 more at a salvage yard near Camp Verde. She slept 2 nights beneath a picnic shelter outside Clarkdale using the wool coat as a mattress. By the 42nd morning, she had $6, half a tank, and the brass rule wrapped in a sock. Rain drove her into the Flagstaff City Coconino County Public Library. A bulletin board beside the Arizona history shelves carried a yellowed sheet headed "County Surplus Structures Sold as Is." Most listings were sheds and collapsed cabins. At the bottom was an observatory tower on an abandoned parcel west of Mars Hill, $85 cash buyer responsible for access stabilization and liens. Beneath it, someone had written "Dome inoperable, no utilities, demolition pending." Iris read the notice 3 times, then used the library phone. The clerk said the tower could still be purchased if she signed before Friday and accepted no inspection refund or extension. She sold the Corolla that evening to the salvage yard for $94, kept $8 for food and bus fare, and folded $85 inside an old road map. Before sunrise, with the sighting rule beneath her coat, she started toward the tower her father had once refused to discuss. By Friday afternoon, Iris would learn that the observatory had been waiting under her own name. The bus left Iris at the Flagstaff station before noon, and she walked west with her duffel, rubbing one shoulder raw. The county directions said the parcel lay 7 miles beyond the last regular stop, but roadwork added another 2. She followed Route 66, then climbed a service road through Ponderosa Pine until the light thinned and sleet began striking her coat. At dusk, she found an open-sided hay barn beyond the fence of an unused pasture. The temperature reached 24 degrees. Iris slept between 2 dry bales, her boots beneath her head, and the brass sighting rule inside her shirt, waking whenever mice moved through the straw. Morning brought a sky scrubbed blue and a mile of frozen mud. She returned to town with hay in her hair and passed the Galaxy Diner, Babbitt Brothers Trading Company, Mountain Sports, Flagstaff, the Orpheum Theater, and a narrow repair shop called Coconino Clock and Instrument. Each business had warm glass and someone moving inside. Iris kept walking until she reached the county offices, where stone steps held the night's cold in their centers. The clerk's office smelled of copier heat and old envelopes. Behind the counter sat a woman with silver hair gathered under a tortoiseshell comb. A brass nameplate read Martha Bell Property Disposition. Martha looked at Iris's duffel, then at the folded notice. You understand there is no maintained road? Yes, ma'am. You understand the dome may collapse? Yes, ma'am. You understand there is no water or power? Yes, ma'am. You understand the county will not rescue your investment? Yes, ma'am. Martha removed her glasses and polished them with the corner of a blue handkerchief. Most people ask whether there is a mistake in the price. Is there? No. Iris placed $85 on the counter. The bills had been folded so long that they rose at the creases. Martha counted them once, aligned their corners, and opened a deed packet thick with warnings. Iris signed beside 6 red arrows. The clerk pressed a brass stamp into a black pad and brought it down with both hands. The seal left a raised circle through 3 sheets of paper. You will take West Route 66 to Observatory Mesa, Martha said. Past the old access gate, follow the cinder track south for 1 8/10 miles. Where it divides at a lightning-scarred pine, keep right. The tower is another half-mile uphill. She slid the deed forward, then stopped with 2 fingers resting on Iris's surname. Vale. Iris waited. Martha leaned closer. A tiny scar crossed one of her knuckles. Nathaniel Vale. My father. For several seconds only the wall clock moved. I used to come here, Martha said. Not often. Once every few years, usually near closing. He searched the original survey books for that tower and asked whether the ownership had changed. Did he say why? He said he was correcting an old omission. Martha opened a lower drawer and removed a cloth-bound index. She turned pages by their edges until she found a card darkened by fingerprints. The observatory had been commissioned in 1928 by astronomer Elias Rook and transferred in 1964 to the High Desert Celestial Survey. The last licensed surveyor named beneath it was Nathaniel Vale. Iris read the line twice. I worked there. According to this, he was its final field custodian. Martha tapped a penciled notation dated 1989. The county could never locate the survey trust after its charter lapsed. Your father contested the demolition once, but he did not establish ownership. Why didn't he tell me? The clerk closed the book gently. That is not written here. Martha placed the deed in a manila envelope and drew a map on the back. Before handing it over, she looked again at Iris's coat, the duffel, and the $8 remaining in coins on the counter. There is a ranch house near the first gate, she said. The owner is Mr. Ortega. He watches the mesa. Tell him Martha sent you. The walk back through town seemed shorter because Iris now carried a place, though the place was roofless in every legal sense that mattered. Beyond the final houses, the pavement narrowed and the wind strengthened. At the old gate, she found a low adobe home behind 2 walnut trees planted too close together. A yellow dog came first, barking with its whole body. An elderly man in a denim jacket followed, carrying a feed scoop. County land is uphill, he said. I bought the observatory. The dog stopped barking. Mr. Ortega studied the envelope. His left eyelid drooped slightly, giving him the patient look of someone sighting along a fence line. Martha, no, you are walking. She drew the route. That sounds like Martha. He filled Iris's canteen from an outdoor spigot and gave her 2 tortillas wrapped around beans. When she offered a quarter, he closed her fingers over it. Keep right at the burned pine, he said. The left track ends at a wash. Dog's called Mercury. He'll bark tonight if coyotes come close. Mercury accompanied her to the gate, then sat beneath the walnuts as she climbed. The cinder road rose across the mesa in long black curves. At the split, lightning had opened the pine from crown to root, leaving a pale seam through the trunk. Iris kept right. Near sunset, the trees withdrew from a bare ridge and the tower appeared against the eastern sky. It stood 42 feet high, built of rough local limestone around a square base approximately 26 feet across. The upper chamber narrowed beneath a riveted iron dome streaked orange with rust. Half the roof flashing had peeled loose. A short chimney leaned from the caretaker's room, and one exterior stair had broken away from its anchor. Over the entrance hung a tarnished copper sign. Most of the lettering had vanished, but High Desert Celestial Survey remained readable beneath the corrosion. Iris unlocked the county chain with the key Martha had given her. The door opened 6 inches and caught against fallen plaster. She set her shoulder to it until the debris scraped aside. Cold air came out carrying limestone dust mouse droppings and the faint mineral smell of old machinery. Her boot touched broken glass. Somewhere above, a loose sheet of metal clicked with each gust. The front room held a narrow desk, a cast-iron stove, and shelves furred gray with ash. When Iris dragged one finger across the desk, the wood beneath felt smooth as sealed bone. The back room had once been used for calculations. Rolled charts lay collapsed in a cabinet, their edges tasting bitter with dust when she pulled one free using her teeth and both hands. A rusted sink clung to one wall. The tap gave no water, only a hollow cough that echoed upward. A spiral stair curved through the tower. Iris climbed carefully, testing every tread before shifting her weight. The brass telescope waited beneath the dome, longer than a small boat, and mounted on a stone pier split from floor to shoulder. Its main tube was tarnished almost brown. The eyepiece smelled of cold metal when she leaned near it. Above, the dome shutters had fused together, allowing one blade of evening light through a seam no wider than a coin. She placed her palm on the telescope. Even through her glove, the brass held a deep, settled cold. Near the mounting fork hung the lead counterweight, an immense dark cylinder suspended from a steel arm. Iris pushed it lightly. It did not move, but something inside answered with a low, delayed knock. She listened again. The sound did not belong to solid lead. Night came quickly at that altitude. Iris returned downstairs before the stair disappeared into darkness, swept a space beside the cold stove with a square of cardboard, and ate one tortilla slowly. The second she wrapped for morning, wind pressed grit beneath the door and made the tower breathe through its cracks. She lay on the floor with Nathaniel's wool coat beneath her head. Through a broken upper pane, she could see a narrow strip of stars turning above the ridge. The sighting rule rested beside her hand, and the deed remained inside her shirt. For the first time in 43 nights, no one could order her to move before dawn. The observatory had been waiting under her own name, continuing directly from the uploaded structure and the last physical scene. At first light, Iris climbed behind the tower and found the well beneath a warped plywood cover. The shaft was lined with stone and capped by a hand pump whose handle had rusted upright. She poured half her canteen into the leather cup to soften it, worked the handle 37 times, and heard water rise through the pipe with a sound like someone drawing breath. The first flow came brown. By noon, it ran clear enough to boil. The outhouse stood downhill among junipers, its roof tilted but sound. Inside, a black widow had webbed the paper holder to the wall. Iris moved it outdoors with a jar, swept the floor with a pine branch, and repaired the door latch using wire taken from the county tag. For 3 days, she learned the tower by sound. The plank beside the stove gave one dry complaint. The 6th stair rang beneath its iron tread. Near the calculation room, 2 floorboards creaked in sequence, though the second remained silent if she stepped close to the wall. At night, she could distinguish wind in the dome from mice behind plaster, and the soft contraction of the telescope's brass tube as the temperature fell. The counterweight knocked only when she pushed it from the east. She did not touch it again until she had tools. Coconino Clock and Instrument occupied a long room where every wall ticked at a different pace. Pendulum clocks breathed behind glass. Surveyors' levels, barometers, and brass compasses rested in green felt trays beneath yellow lamps. The owner, Amos Pike, wore a leather magnifying loupe over his right eye even while sweeping. He looked at Iris's county deed, then at the sighting rule she placed on the counter. Vale made this mark, he said, touching a tiny 5-pointed star engraved near the hinge. He repaired my transit when nobody else would open it. I need enough tools to make the tower safe. Enough is expensive. I can work. Amos lifted the loupe and revealed a pale ring pressed around his eye. Can you clean clock cases without touching the movements? Yes. Then you copy figures exactly? Yes. He opened a ruled ledger. Then you have an account. 4 hours here buys $10 of credit. Miss 2 agreed mornings and it closes. Iris signed beneath her name. Amos sold her a wire chimney brush for $8.75, a 6-inch cold chisel for $6.40, a 2-pound drilling hammer for $9.20, a pry bar for $7.15, and a tin of penetrating oil for $4.60. From beneath the counter, he added a stained booklet titled Repairs for Remote Stations. This is not on the account, he said. I cannot take it free. You can return it with notes in the margins. Back at the tower, Iris began with the chimney because warmth would make every other repair possible. She removed the stovepipe, carried it outside, and tapped each section over a sheet of canvas. Black flakes fell in curved plates. The masonry flue required slower work. She tied the round wire brush to 30 feet of braided rope, climbed to the roof hatch, and lowered it until the bristles lodged in the first bend. Then she pulled upward, rotated a quarter turn, and lowered it again. The creosote was not glossy enough to indicate a chimney fire, but it lay nearly an inch thick along the northern wall. Iris worked from above for 2 hours, then from below with the brush reversed. Twice the rope caught. Once the brush struck loose mortar and grit poured into her eyes. She washed them at the pump, waited until her sight cleared, and returned. After 6 hours, the canvas held 11 pounds of soot-bird nesting and dry juniper twigs. She tested the flue with a twist of newspaper held beneath the throat. The smoke rose without spilling. Only then did she place 3 split pine sticks inside the stove, lay smaller kindling across them, and strike a match against the stone hearth. The fire hesitated. Then the draft caught it. Heat entered the room by degrees, first warming the stove's iron ribs, then the dust on the floor, then Iris's hands held several inches from the door. She boiled well water for 12 minutes and cooked oatmeal in a dented tin cup. It was her first hot meal since the motel laundromat. She ate sitting on the floor while snowmelt hissed from her boots. The following morning, she began examining the upper chamber. The workroom around the telescope held fewer objects than she had imagined, but each had been left deliberately: a mahogany chart case with 24 shallow drawers, a brass chronometer locked in a padded box, 3 lens rings wrapped in linen, a plumb bob suspended over a copper datum mark, a drafting stool with 1 repaired leg, 2 slate notebooks, and an oak rack containing glass photographic plates darkened by age. On the north wall hung a star chart with several coordinates pricked through by a needle. The paper had browned except where a missing instrument had once protected it from light. Iris opened the slate notebooks. Most pages contained weather records and dome positions. The last entry ended on November 18, 1964, halfway through a sentence concerning magnetic deviation southwest of meteor crater. Her father's name did not appear. The telescope counterweight hung below the declination axis, nearly 3 feet long and wider than Iris's chest. Lead had been cast around an iron core, then covered with dark gray paint. According to the manufacturer's plate on the mounting fork, it should have weighed 460 pounds. Iris could not lift it, but weight could be questioned without lifting. She measured the exposed suspension arm, marked its resting position with chalk, and attached a 5-pound clock weight borrowed from Amos to the opposite end. The arm moved farther than the telescope manual predicted. She repeated the test with 10 pounds, then 15, recording each angle. The counterweight was approximately 70 pounds light. She removed the clock weights and tapped the cylinder with the wooden handle of her hammer. Near the upper rim, the lead answered with a flat, dead sound. 6 inches lower, it rang faintly. On the eastern face, the note changed again and seemed to travel inward before returning. There was a cavity inside. Iris brushed away flaking paint until she found a circle slightly larger than her palm. Its edge had been disguised beneath lead-colored wax. At the center sat a thin disc of cedar darkened with graphite and pressed flush into the metal. She warmed the wax with a cloth soaked in hot water rather than risk flame near the old mechanism. When it softened, she traced the seam with the point of the cold chisel using only finger pressure. The cedar disc turned 1/8 of an inch and stopped. A 5-pointed star had been cut into its reverse side. The mark matched the one on her father's sighting rule. Iris fitted the rule's narrow end into the star and turned clockwise. Something released inside the counterweight with a deliberate brass click. The cedar disc moved outward against her palm. Behind it was a tube of blackened copper. She drew the tube out slowly. It was 20 inches long and heavy enough to require both hands. 3 parcels had been packed inside and separated with circles of felt so they would not knock together when the telescope moved. The first parcel was wrapped in oilcloth. Within it lay Nathaniel's celestial compass, the compact sextant from their Saturday journeys, and the brass micrometer he had once allowed Iris to touch only after washing her hands. Each tool carried the smell of camphor and machine oil. None had burned. The second parcel held raw material: 5 sheets of astronomical plate glass, a coil of silver wire, lens grinding powders sealed in waxed envelopes, and 4 unfinished calibration screws wrapped in linen. On one envelope, Nathaniel had written Iris's name. She set it down without opening it. The third parcel was a rectangular tin box bound with cotton tape. Beneath the knot lay a sealed letter and a folded map. Iris placed both aside, then lifted the lid. Money had been arranged in paper sleeves according to denomination. Most of it was cash rather than coins: old $100 notes, $50 bills, and bank envelopes carrying withdrawal dates from 1959 through 1964. Beneath them were $20 St. Gaudens gold pieces, Morgan silver dollars, Walking Liberty half-dollars, and rolls of Mercury dimes. Iris counted everything on the felt-covered chart table. She counted once by denomination, once by packet, and a third time from the opposite direction. The total was 90 or 37.50. Under the final roll of dimes lay a tarnished military medal. The ribbon had faded to the color of dried blood. The reverse bore a name, Ira Rook, and the year 1918. A small card beneath it read, "Return to the family when the sky is open again." Iris placed the medal beside the unopened letter. The folded map had been drawn over a geological survey of the desert southeast of Flagstaff. Lines of celestial coordinates converged on a marked ellipse beyond the known crater fields. Beside it, in Nathaniel's handwriting, were density calculations, magnetic readings, and 3 verification dates. At the bottom, he had written mass likely metallic, primary body unrecorded. Iris understood enough to know what the figures claimed. She also understood that a claim was not a discovery until another careful person could stand at the same point and find the same thing. A coordinate was a promise. She returned the cash to its sleeves, wrapped the tools, and placed everything in the empty chronometer cabinet. The letter remained on the table. She could see the first line through the thin paper, but night had entered the dome, and she would not read her father's last words by a failing flashlight. Instead, Iris carried the medal and the map downstairs, stepped outside, and walked to the stone cistern below the well. Meltwater had collected there beneath a skin of ice. She broke the edge with one finger and watched the dark surface settle. Above the Mesa, Orion cleared the ponderosa trees. The coordinates on the map could wait until morning. The letter could wait until her hand stopped shaking. The observatory had been waiting under her own name. At dawn, Iris carried the letter to the calculation room and placed it beneath the eastern window. The handwriting on the envelope leaned forward in narrow, disciplined strokes. She knew it from grocery lists, telescope labels, and the birthday cards her father had signed without ornament. Even before she broke the wax, she recognized the pressure of his hand. "My dear one, whoever you are. Dr. Helen Marrow at St. Joseph's Hospital in Phoenix has told me that the tremor in my right hand is caused by early Parkinson's disease. She advises that I leave delicate optical work to steadier hands. I have not followed that advice completely, but I have learned to know the difference between devotion and damage." This tower began with Elias Rook, born in Lowell in 1869, who came to Arizona in 1901 and surveyed mining claims by starlight. His daughter Miriam Rook Vale, born here in 1878 and photographed outside the station in 1903, learned his calculations and kept the chronometers during winter. Her son Samuel Vale, born in Flagstaff in 1905, rebuilt the telescope drive after returning from France without his brother Ira, who died in the Meuse-Argonne fighting in 1918. Samuel's son was my father, Thomas Vale, born in Prescott in 1932. I am Nathaniel Vale, born in 1960, and I was the last person paid to keep this instrument true. The High Desert Celestial Survey closed on November 18, 1964. For more than 30 years afterward, the tower remained silent while its records were scattered, sold, or deliberately hidden. I came here when I could. I kept the dome from seizing completely and repeated the measurements Elias began. Should you restore the telescope, warm the objective lens no faster than 2 degrees Fahrenheit each hour. Mix lens cleaning fluid at 1 part pure alcohol to 4 parts distilled water. Never tap water. Allow silvered components 20 minutes to reach room temperature before touching their housings. When calibrating the micrometer, take 5 readings east of the meridian and 5 west, then discard the widest pair. The map enclosed marks a metallic body beneath the desert. I verified the coordinates by stars, compass, deviation, and 3 separate magnetic surveys. Do not mistake its value for ownership. A finding this large belongs first to the truth, then to the land, and only afterward to any person's name. Inheritance is not the money in the box. It is the habit of checking a number when no one is watching, wiping a lens before putting it away, and leaving an instrument more exact than you found it. If you can do those things, the work has reached the right hands. Behind the tower, 40 paces west of the pump, you will find a basalt marker cut with a 5-pointed star. Beneath it is the original north reference for the survey. Begin there. The house is not empty. It has been waiting. You are welcome here. Dr. Nathaniel Thomas Vale, September 22, 2010. Iris read the letter twice. The second time she paused wherever the ink had thickened, imagining the tremor he had tried to discipline. Then she folded the pages along their original creases, pressed them flat with both palms, and returned them to the envelope. She went through the rear door with the compass in one pocket and her father's sighting rule in the other. 40 paces west of the pump brought her to a stand of rabbit brush below the ridge. She cleared stones with the heel of her boot until a black basalt face appeared beneath the soil. A 5-pointed star had been cut into its center. She set the brass compass on the marker. The needle trembled, circled once, and settled several degrees away from the modern survey north marked on the county map. When Iris aligned the sighting rule with the old datum, the tower, the lightning-scarred pine, and a distant notch in the San Francisco peaks formed one exact line. Nathaniel had not left her a legend. He had left a measurement she could repeat. Back inside, Iris unwrapped the small celestial compass from the oilcloth. Its lamp chamber still held a dry cotton wick. She cleaned the reservoir, poured in a spoonful of lamp oil from the maintenance cabinet, and waited until the wick darkened. One match brought up a low amber flame behind the compass glass. The light was scarcely larger than a coin, but it illuminated the engraved degrees around the dial. Iris placed it beside the letter and remembered the people who had carried her toward this room without knowing where she was going. Martha Bell, who had drawn the safe route on the deed envelope. Mr. Ortega, who had filled her canteen and folded beans into warm tortillas. Amos Pike, who had opened a credit ledger instead of asking for proof she could not provide. And the salvage yard mechanic who had left $8 in her hand after buying the failing Corolla. None of them had repaired her life. Each had simply refused to make the difficult part harder. Before this story moves forward, think of one small kindness someone once gave you when they had no reason to. Perhaps it was a meal, a ride, a key, or an extra hour of patience. Tell us about it in the comments and name the person if you still can. That evening, Iris carried the sextant, compass, micrometer, and sighting rule downstairs. She arranged them beside her blanket in the order her father had taught her to return instruments to a case. The letter rested beneath the compass lamp, protected from the draft. She slept with the heirlooms within reach and the basalt marker holding its line beneath the stars. The first snow arrived on December 3rd and measured 4.5 inches against the telescope pier. By morning, meltwater had found 3 openings in the caretaker room roof and was dripping into cooking pots Iris had placed beneath the rafters. She read the roofing chapter in Amos Pike's repair manual 3 times, once beside the stove and twice beneath the damaged eaves. The low roof measured 18 by 26 feet. Allowing 10% for waste, she calculated 7 bundles of cedar shingles, 2 rolls of 15-pound felt, and 14 pounds of hot-dipped nails. Amos extended her credit and brought out a roofing hatchet with a worn leather grip. "It belonged to my brother," he said. "He would object to rust more than borrowing." The following morning, Mr. Ortega arrived carrying a coil of rope in a carpenter's square. Before ranching, he had roofed houses for 38 years. When Iris mentioned payment, he removed his hat, shook snow from the brim, and placed it back on his head without answering. They stripped the rotten course's sister to split rafter with 2 lengths of Douglas fir and snapped a chalk line across each new run. Mr. Ortega taught her to set a nail with 3 strokes, 1 to start it, 1 to drive it, 1 to seat it, without bruising the shingle. "That nail's proud. I can strike it again. Pull it." They worked 11 days. Wind lifted the felt twice, and once Iris slid far enough to tear her coat on a nail head. Mr. Ortega tied her safety rope shorter and resumed laying shingles. On December 14, Iris fixed the final ridge cap beneath a sky the color of cold iron. That night, snow fell without entering the caretaker room. She woke twice from habit, listened for dripping, and heard only the stove settling. January exposed what firelight had hidden. 7 chimney bricks were spalling their faces, peeling into thin red scales, while the mortar between them had softened to powder. When Iris pressed a joint with her thumb, half an inch collapsed inward. She removed each loose brick, numbered it in chalk, and brushed the cavity clean. Amos found sound replacements behind his store and showed her how to mix 3 parts hydraulic lime with 1 part fire clay, adding water until the mortar held a ridge without clinging to the trowel. The repair took 3 weeks in temperatures that remained in the 20s. Iris worked barehanded because gloves dulled her sense of the joints. Every 15 minutes her fingers went numb and she had to hold them beneath her arms until the ache returned. On the 9th day, a brick slipped before the mortar set and broke across the hearth. She cleaned the joint and began again. On the 17th, wind pushed smoke down the open flue and covered her face with gray dust. She kept the new mortar damp beneath burlap, misting it morning and evening so it would cure slowly rather than crack. Where the chimney met the roof, she replaced the failed flashing and folded each corner with a wooden block instead of hammering directly against the metal. The test fire came on January 28. Iris warmed the flue first with a rolled newspaper, then lit 3 narrow splits of pine. Smoke climbed through the repaired throat, past the cold masonry, and drew cleanly above the roof. Mr. Ortega watched from the yard, one hand resting on Mercury's head. "That will hold," he said. Iris remained beside the stove until the final curl of smoke vanished into the blue. The caretaker room and calculation room were laid in white pine planks secured with hand-cut rosehead nails. Decades of soot had turned them nearly black, but beneath a cabinet, Iris found one protected strip the color of old honey. She rented a random orbit sander from Amos for $14 a day. Before starting, she drove every proud nail below the surface with a narrow punch, then tested the machine on a board that would remain beneath the desk. The first pass used 80 grit paper and removed grime in dark ribbons. The second, at 120 grit, softened the tool marks without erasing them. The final 220 grit pass left the boards smooth enough to catch light, but not so polished that they appeared new. Dust entered everything. Iris found it inside her boots, beneath her collar, and along the closed edge of Nathaniel's letter. Each evening she vacuumed twice, then wiped the floor with a cloth dampened in mineral spirits. One morning she carried the sander outside and could not make herself lift it back through the door. She walked downhill instead. A great blue heron stood at the edge of a marshy stock pond below the mesa, its reflection narrowed by thin ice. Iris sat on a stone for 3 hours while the bird took one deliberate step after another. She performed no work that day. Near sunset, the heron opened its wings and crossed the trees without hurry. The next morning, she returned to the floor. She applied 3 thin coats of penetrating oil, rubbing each one along the grain and removing every wet patch after 20 minutes. The final coat cured for 48 hours behind a locked door. As it dried, the pine shifted from dark honey toward mahogany, revealing saw marks, old repairs, and the crescent dents left by generations of dropped instruments. Iris did not sand those away. 8 windows served the lower rooms and stairwell. 3 had no glass. 4 were cracked from corner to corner. The 8th held a wavering original pane marked 1788 in one lower corner, likely salvaged from an earlier territorial building and installed when the tower was constructed. Iris preserved it. She removed the 7 damaged sashes, labeled each joint, and scraped the glazing beds down to sound wood. Amos supplied salvaged glass close enough in thickness that the reflections did not appear unnaturally flat. She kneaded DAP 33 glazing putty until it warmed in her hands, rolled it into narrow ropes, and pressed each pane into a continuous bedding layer. Glazer's points held the glass without strain. Iris then drew the putty knife along the edge in one uninterrupted pass, keeping the bevel high enough to shed water but low enough to remain hidden from inside. The sash cords had rotted into brown fibers. She replaced them with quarter-inch cotton cord, feeding each length over its pulley and tying a figure-8 knot through the iron counterweight. The first sash rose crooked. She opened the weight pocket, shortened the left cord by half an inch, and tried again. By the seventh window, her cuts were clean and her putty lines nearly straight. She saved the 1788 pane for last. Its surface bent the walnut trees into slow green waves, and one corner carried a tiny trapped bubble. Iris cleaned it only with distilled water and a soft cloth, leaving the old glass in its original sash. As she secured the final cord, a chickadee landed on a walnut branch outside. It turned its black-capped head toward the room, struck the bark once with its beak, and remained while Iris raised the restored window. Cold February air entered without broken glass rattling in the frame. Behind the stove, horsehair plaster had separated from hand-split oak lath and bowed outward like cloth holding water. Iris tried 3 patches near the chimney. The first dried too quickly and cracked. The second sagged between the laths. The third released overnight and broke on the hearth. Amos found an old feed bag of horsehair in his brother's storeroom. Iris washed it, cut the longest strands, and folded them into lime plaster until the mixture held together when lifted from the hawk. She dampened the lath before each application. The scratch coat was pressed through the gaps and scored with a notched scrap of wood. Over it she laid a 3/8-inch brown coat, keeping the surface moist through a 72-hour cure. The final coat measured 1/8 inch and was closed with a steel trowel only after the sheen began to fade. The repaired wall remained uneven where old work met new. Iris ran her fingertips across the seam and left it visible. These patches will hold another 100 years. By March, people had begun leaving help without asking whether Iris deserved it. Doris Morrow, who owned the Galaxy Diner, drove up twice a week in a red station wagon with flour dust on the sleeves of her black dress. She never crossed the threshold. Paper bags appeared beside the door containing biscuit soup in a jar, coffee grounds, or an orange wrapped in a napkin. The first time Iris caught her setting one down, she followed her to the car with $3. Doris pushed the money back using one square finger. "Pay me in candles when the shop reopens." It was not a shop. It may need to become something. She drove away before Iris could answer. Caleb Ortega arrived on an old blue Schwinn with a splitting maul balanced across the handlebars. He was 16, narrow as a fence rail, and wore one red shoelace and one black. Without introduction, he began splitting the rounds Mr. Ortega had left beside the chimney. Iris offered him money after the first cord. He shook his head and kept his eyes on the grain. "My mother said." "About your grandfather." "What did she say?" "That he fixed her father's survey compass." Caleb raised the maul again. The blade fell exactly through the checking line. Reverend Boyd walked the Misa each morning in a broad gray hat, carrying a walking stick polished where his hand held it. He never entered the tower and never asked Iris to attend his church. He tipped his hat when he passed. On mornings when smoke rose cleanly from the chimney, he paused at the gate and offered the same 4-word prayer: "Keep her work honest." Then he continued downhill. Their kindness did not gather into ceremony. It arrived as soup split wood and 4 words carried off by the wind. Iris postponed the cellar until February 11. The door beneath the spiral stair had swollen in its frame, and when it opened, cold air rose carrying mineral damp and the smell of packed earth. 7 granite steps descended to a 12 by 15-foot fieldstone floor. The ceiling was low enough that Iris had to bend beneath the telescope pier. At the center lay a dressed granite slab smoother than the surrounding stones. A 5-pointed survey star had been carved into one corner, crossed by the narrow arc used on Nathaniel's celestial compass. Iris brushed the mark clean but did not lift the slab. Whatever lay beneath had waited this long without being disturbed. Under the third stair, her lantern revealed a small oak box wedged behind loose mortar. She worked it free with both hands. The lid had no lock, only a sliding wooden catch. Inside lay a brass key whose bow had been shaped into a compass rose. Beneath it rested a tintype dated 1903. The young woman in the image stood outside the tower before the iron dome had rusted. She held a surveyor's plumb bob in one hand and looked into the camera with Iris's level gaze. On the back, written in brown ink, were the words, "Miriam Rook Vale, daughter of Elias Rook, age 25, summer of 1903. Iris carried the key upstairs and placed it on the mantel beside the celestial compass. She tested it in the chart case, the chronometer box, the desk, and the locked cabinet beneath the telescope. It fit none of them. The key remained on the mantel. She did not know what it opened. Snow withdrew from the south face of the mesa in narrow ribbons. The creek below Mr. Ortega's pasture grew loud enough to hear from the tower, and the walnut branches filled with pale green catkins that shook loose yellow dust whenever Mercury brushed beneath them. Iris cleaned the recovered tools but did not begin a full celestial survey. The telescope still needed a true foundation. The dome required new rollers, and her hands had not yet earned the confidence of the old micrometer. She chose one mercury dime from the cache and exchanged it through Amos for modern value. The money bought plate glass scraps, silver wire polishing rouge, and enough brass stock for small calibration fittings. Each morning she practiced on samples no larger than her palm. She ground glass against glass, timed the cooling, and recorded every failure beside every improvement. The house was patient, so was she. 2 winters later, in December 2024, Iris completed the first instrument that carried every part of the inherited work. It was not a telescope and not an object anyone would place in a museum. It was a palm-sized celestial compass made for a rancher who needed to verify fence lines where magnetic readings wandered near volcanic rock. Iris cut the brass housing by hand, seated a silver pivot, and balanced the needle until it returned to north without trembling. She engraved a 5-pointed star beneath the lid and calibrated the sight against Polaris on 3 separate nights. The final reading differed from the county benchmark by less than 1 minute of arc. Before handing it over, she wrote the coordinate twice, once in numbers, once in words. The restored lower rooms remained spare. White pine floors held the dark marks of their first century. The plaster seams showed where Iris's hands had joined old lime to new. Nathaniel's letter rested beneath glass in the calculation room, while the recovered instruments occupied the chart case with space left beside them. Upstairs, the stone pier had been stabilized with a steel collar and lime grout. Amos found replacement dome rollers from a dismantled grain silo, and Caleb helped raise them through the roof hatch. When the shutters finally opened, rust fell around them in red flakes, and the whole chamber filled with winter sky. The brass key remained unexplained until the following spring. A windstorm broke a dead limb from one of the walnut trees beside Mr. Ortega's house. Caleb came to the tower carrying an oval brass plate he had found beneath the exposed bark. Its face bore a compass rose identical to the bow of the key. The plate had been set into the tree decades earlier, then swallowed by growth. Iris returned with him and cleared the opening carefully. Behind the plate was a narrow copper sleeve sealed with wax. The key turned once, releasing a spring catch that had survived beneath the wood. Inside lay a folded 48-star American flag and a note written by Miriam Rook Vale on October 3, 1918, while the Meuse-Argonne offensive was being fought in France. She had written to her brother Ira. She told him the observatory dome had opened cleanly that autumn, that their father still checked the chronometer each night, and that she had marked the walnut tree so something of the family would remain rooted if the war took the men away. The letter had never been mailed. A second line added after news of Ira's death asked that his medal be kept near an instrument he had helped build. Iris folded the flag along its existing seams. She returned it to the copper sleeve with a copy of Miriam's letter and sealed the opening against weather. The original note went beside Nathaniel's in the calculation room. On November 11, 2025, Iris carried Ira Rook's medal to Citizens Cemetery in Flagstaff. At the Veterans section beneath the American flag raised for Armistice Day, she placed it beside a temporary marker bearing his name, regiment, and the year 1918. Reverend Boyd offered no sermon. He removed his gray hat and said the same 4 words he had used at the tower: keep his work honest. The medal remained only long enough for the cemetery record to be photographed and entered. Then Iris returned it to the observatory, where it rested beneath the 48-star flag's empty display case and a copy of Miriam's note. The money was handled with equal restraint. Iris spent 4 coins. The first was the mercury dime used for practice materials. A Morgan dollar paid the filing fee to establish the High Desert Survey Trust. 1 Walking Liberty $half covered certified copies of the original property records. A second mercury dime bought the cotton paper on which she copied Nathaniel's letter by hand. The remaining coins, notes, and bank envelopes returned to the tin box. Iris added a new ledger showing every amount, date, and purpose. She sealed the box inside the counterweight behind the cedar disc with instructions written for the next one. The meteorite map required greater care. Iris repeated Nathaniel's calculations from the basalt marker and confirmed the celestial coordinates over 14 months. She then submitted the site information to the Arizona Geological Survey and the appropriate tribal and federal land authorities without claiming the body for herself. The magnetic anomaly was verified, but excavation was postponed while ownership, cultural review, and environmental protections were considered. Nathaniel's name appeared only in the technical record as the surveyor whose measurements had led others to the location. That was enough. The tower reopened quietly. Doris pinned an index card to the corkboard at the Galaxy Diner. Celestial compasses calibrated, survey instruments cleaned, star readings by appointment, High Desert Observatory. There was no telephone at first. Customers wrote their names beneath the card or left envelopes with Doris. By autumn, the mailing list held more than 40 names: ranchers, hikers, amateur astronomers, teachers, and 3 families whose inherited instruments had sat unused for decades. Iris accepted only work she could perform exactly. When an instrument needed a skill she did not possess, she returned it untouched with the name of someone better qualified. Doris received 2 hand-poured beeswax candles for every month of food she had left at the door. She placed them on the diner counter and lit them before sunrise. Caleb returned during the first clear week of winter carrying a wooden sign wrapped in a horse blanket. He had grown taller, though one shoelace was still red and the other black. The sign read High Desert Celestial Survey in hand-carved letters. Beneath the old name on a separate strip of walnut he had added, "And daughters." Iris ran her thumb over the final S. "There was only Miriam," she said. Caleb leaned the sign against the wall. "Then there was you." I had carved the lower strip so it could be removed without damaging the original name. Iris noticed this and said nothing. Together they mounted it above the entrance where the tarnished copper sign had hung. That evening she opened a sheet of cotton paper purchased with the second dime and began a letter for whoever might one day open the counterweight after her. "My dear one, whoever you are." She wrote about the well pump, the original pane marked 1788, and the granite slab she had chosen not to lift. She recorded the telescope's corrected declination error, the new dome roller dimensions, and the location of every repaired roof rafter. She did not tell the next keeper what the observatory should become. She told them how to check whether the work remained true. Near midnight, Iris carried the finished letter upstairs. The dome stood open, and the telescope moved beneath her hand without grinding. Beyond the shutters, the winter stars crossed the meridian at their patient speed. The observatory had been waiting under her own name. She folded the letter along 3 careful creases and placed it inside the tin box. Before closing the cedar disc, she added Nathaniel's brass sighting rule, leaving its narrow end aligned with the 5-pointed lock. Below, the stove burned low. Outside, walnut branches moved over the road, and the sign Caleb carved made one soft sound against its iron brackets. "The forgotten observatory tower waits. It has always waited." In the county clerk's office, Martha Bell kept the first dollar of Iris's payment in the back of her desk drawer. She had written the deed number across its edge in blue ink. Whenever the county replaced a form, a lock, or a clerk, the dollar remained beneath the old property index, folded once through the center and kept exactly where she had placed it.